Hi, I'm Gary Thomas. I'm so glad to be with you today. I'm the author of a number of books, but today I'm speaking out of this one, Everybody Matters, Strengthening Your Body to Strengthen Your Soul. Though my wife and I have lived in Houston now for a little over a decade, we're actually Seattleites. We grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and we raised our kids in a small college town just about 20 miles south of the Canadian border. It's called Bellingham, Washington. There wasn't a lot that went on in this town, which you can feel by the sense that when a new store was coming to town, everybody at church was talking about it. It's called Trader Joe's. It's this funky little organic kind of grocery store, I guess. And I heard the wives talking about it at church. Have you heard when it opens? The day it opened, my wife had circled it on our calendar. The radio station came and did a remote thing so that everybody could get excited about this new store opening. When my wife was there, she said you really couldn't even get into the parking lot. The aisles were emptied. It was a huge success for Trader Joe's. I didn't understand the hoopla, but for some people it was quite the excitement. About 3 weeks later, we were coming home from church, and Lisa said, I need to pick up some vegetables. You mind if we stop at Trader Joe's? I said, oh, yeah, I haven't seen it yet. It'll be interesting. She goes, you haven't seen Trader Joe's yet? I go, honey, it's a grocery store. I just didn't understand the excitement. She goes, well, I can't wait for you to see it. I'm so excited for you to see it. So we pull up. And you'll just have to forgive me because after all of this hoopla and excitement, when I'm walking into the store, I'm kind of expecting gold bricks on the aisleways, maybe fairy dust coming out, angelic choirs serenading me. It was such a big deal. I thought this was going to be amazing. But it was just sort of a funky, organic-leaning grocery store. I didn't get it. Now, I couldn't compare it really to a lot of other stores by what foods I would buy. My wife is a little suspicious of me buying food because I don't read the labels closely enough. But there's one thing in my family that I have bought our entire history, and that's toilet paper. I don't know how I became an expert on toilet paper. I know some guys, they could tell you what model of car they drive. They could look up in the sky and tell you what plane that is. I don't have that kind of useful knowledge, but I know toilet paper. I know the difference between 1-ply and 2-ply. Don't even bother with 1-ply. It's a waste. I know the gimmicks you avoid, the whole notion about moisturizer on it. Good in theory, doesn't really work in practice. So I know my toilet paper. I thought, well, okay, I'll see what kind of toilet paper they have. So I find the paper aisle. I go down. They only had one option, so I wasn't impressed at all. And that one option, the biggest thing on the label said, 100% recycled. And my first thought was, ooh. Look, I'm into recycling. I think we should care about the environment. But when it comes to toilet paper, I don't like to think that anybody has used it before. I want my toilet paper fresh. I want it straight from the tree. So I didn't get the whole pull of this new store coming to town, but that's sort of often how it is with so many things in life. Some people get so excited about some things and other people say, I just don't get it. The same thing I think happens with body care, with exercise and health and how we take care of ourselves. Some people, they read magazines and books and listen to podcasts. They go all over just trying to get all the information they can. Others, it's okay, but they might not be quite as serious about it. What I want to do in this talk is create an entirely different motivation for how we look at the way we treat our body, the way we exercise it or don't exercise it, and what we feed it with. And it comes down to this, that body care, what we eat, and how active we are is an aspect of Christian discipleship and worship. It's not just about what we want and what we do. As believers, we have to look at it as an aspect of Christian discipleship and worship. 2 Corinthians 7:1 from the Message says this, quote, with promises like this to pull us on, dear friends, let's make a clean break with everything that defiles or distracts us, both within and without. Let's make our entire lives fit and holy temples for the worship of God. Paul is talking about this as the way we view our bodies, wanting to be clean within and without. It's about making our bodies holy temples that are fit for the worship of God. And so when Christians talk about body care, it should be with an entirely different motivation than we often might hear from secular sources. So often when people talk about body care, particularly when you're talking about commercials and they're trying to sell you products, it's about creating an artificial shape. That your life will be happier if you could look like this stereotypical woman or this stereotypical man. In God's view, it's not about creating an artificial shape. It's about living an abundant life. God tells us to take care of our bodies because he wants us to live an abundant life of service. And I want to stress this at the start because if we're not careful, body care can almost become a vicious weapon against people. Shortly after I came here to Houston, a young woman came in to talk with me. She was trying to figure out her next vocation. She had been a Houston Texans cheerleader one year. She had tried out again and she didn't make it. And I just kind of casually asked her, well, why weren't you able to make it this year? And she said, well, they said I've gotten too thick. And my jaw dropped open, and as a husband of a wife and the father of two young women that were pretty close to her age, I got angry. Nobody looking at this woman could possibly say she looked too thick in my view. So apparently, unless you could slide under a door wearing a winter coat, you were too thick to be a Houston Texans cheerleader. And so if we're not careful when we talk about body shape and taking care of ourselves, we can do it in a way that hurts people if we're trying to pursue this artificial shape instead of a spiritually abundant life. We can do indirect violence against real women and real bodies. Women can feel that they're at war with something that God created to be received with thanksgiving. Look, when you go back to biblical times, women feared leprosy more than anything else. I mean, that was the thing that would bring your life to an end and make it miserable. In the Middle Ages, it was the Black Plague. A century ago, we all feared polio. Now, more often than not, women just fear bread. But you know what? It's not just women that are getting hammered. Men are too. There's a trio of researchers from Harvard and Brown universities, and they coined the phrase called the Adonis complex. They just looked at how men looked, the leading men from action movies and whatnot, even 50 years ago, to what they're supposed to look like today. This exaggerated, muscled, just super low body fat physiques that most men who have a full-time job just aren't going to be able to maintain for more than a few months or maybe even just a few years. And even famous men can feel humbled trying to achieve this artificial body shape. I'll never forget hearing an interview with George Clooney. He talked about being a young actor coming into Hollywood and going down that famous sidewalk, the Walk of Fame, where they have all of the Hollywood stars there. And he came across Clark Gable's star. Now, of course, Clark Gable's one of the most famous actors who's ever lived. And George Clooney, a young actor on his way up, was enamored. And he was shocked at how small Clark Gable's hands and feet seemed. And I don't know why he thought that was so funny, but he said, I mean, he's such a big star. How could he have such small feet? So years and years later, when George Clooney was invited to have his own square on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, he remembered that episode with Clark Gable, and he didn't want another actor 20 years from now coming up who was enamored with George Clooney's career and might think, how did my shoes shape up against George Clooney? So even though George wears a perfectly respectable size 11 shoe, he admits for that day, he went out and got a size 14 pair of shoes so that no actor would come up and be able to laugh at George Clooney that his shoes seemed particularly small. The result of this, even men and women that are lauded as the most beautiful, I think George Clooney was named as one of the most beautiful people in the world by People magazine twice. Even the models and the actors feel shame that they can't quite maintain this artificial body shape. That's not what the abundant life is all about. And this is where the spiritual truth of Jesus Christ helps us confront the physical challenge of healthy living. So let's begin with this. Christians pursue health and body care with an entirely different motivation. What's that motivation? We treat our bodies as instruments instead of ornaments. We treat our bodies as instruments instead of ornaments. They're instruments dedicated to the service of God. We want to take care of our bodies, not so that we have something that people want to look at and admire, but we realize we have such an important message of Jesus Christ. We want to take care of our bodies because it's only through our bodies that we can proclaim that message. If we don't have the kind of health, our service will come to an end. Romans 6:13 puts it this way: offer the parts of your body to him as instruments of righteousness, not an ornament, an instrument. And Romans 12:1, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. Now, while Romans 12:1 is an exhortation, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, I think it's also a great encouragement, because notice Paul says this: they're holy and pleasing to God when we offer our bodies to him. And what I love about this, because as a pastor, I've just talked to a lot of people. Some people are at war with their bodies. They're ashamed of their bodies. They don't feel like their body is good enough for their spouse. They don't feel like their body is good enough for popular opinion. They don't even like their bodies by themselves in front of the mirror. They're ashamed of their bodies. But what Paul is saying, if you offer your body to God today, it is holy and pleasing to him, just as it is. Right now, the body you have, the body you live in, whatever health, whatever shape, even whatever level of fitness it is in, if you offer it to God as an instrument of righteousness to worship him, it is pleasing to him. And God's opinion matters more than anybody else's. Who cares what the world thinks about our bodies if God finds them pleasing? So we have an entirely different motivation, because our holiness and acceptance doesn't rest on the shape of our bodies. Our holiness and acceptance before God rests on the bruised and broken body of Jesus Christ. Losing 20 pounds won't make God love us anymore. Gaining 20 pounds won't make him love us less. What will make our bodies holy and pleasing to God is simply when we offer them as instruments for his service. Because here's the thing that nobody else knows. God knows the body you inhabit more than anyone else. And while we can impact our health in many ways, and we're going to talk about it, and it's important that we do, there is a real factor of genetics in this. I remember speaking at a summer conference. I was one of the speakers there, and we sat at the same tables, and there were these two older men that were always there. They were probably about 10 years older than me, just rail thin. And my wife was astonished because these guys ate twice as much as I did. They would go back for seconds. They would always have desserts. I was eating half as much as them, never had desserts. They're much thinner than I was. In the afternoon, one time, I would go off for my runs. They would sit on the bench eating ice cream, laughing at the people who exercised on vacation. I mean, they were consuming so many more calories and not doing the exercise. And so part of it is God creates bodies differently. He knows that. And he doesn't judge us by the shape of other people's bodies and how we measure up. God is pleased with us by how we care for the one particular body that he gave us. He knows its chemistry. He knows its genetic structure. So while some of us need to lose weight and some of us may need to gain weight and to gain muscle, all of us need to offer whatever body we have right now to God. And that's how our bodies become instantly pleasing to God. Now, as I said before, this is really an act of discipleship and worship. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 says this: do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. In this area of life where things change for me, as I realized My body isn't my own. And that goes against everything our culture says. Keep your laws off my body. This is my body. All that matters is my consent. If you're a Christian, that's not true. Our bodies are a temple of the Holy Spirit. Our bodies belong to God. And when you don't own your own body, when it's on loan to you from your Creator, you're going to treat it in a different way. It was a radical thought for me. Here's an analogy that kind of helped me understand this. Before my own books could feed my family, I used to work on a lot of books with celebrities. One was with an extraordinary man named John Ashcroft. He was two-time governor in the state of Missouri, very popular. He won re-election, I think, by the largest number of votes, percentage of votes since the Civil War, so very popular. Then he ran and became a senator. And at the time we were working on the book, he was rumored to be a presidential candidate, and I wish he would have been successful. I think he would have been a phenomenal president. But we were working together, and John had such a high view of ethics that when working on this personal book, he wouldn't make copies in his Senate office. He had this file of personal papers, some letters that his dad had given to him, some speeches with annotations. There were no copies, and he wanted me to take this file. He said, I think there's some good stuff in here. You could look through it. We can add it to the book. And I'm just terrible at holding on to papers. If you were to look at my office, sometimes it looks like an office supply store just blew up. I'm losing files all the time, having to reprint things. And I was terrified of taking this file out of his office without there being a backup. If I lost it, it would be gone forever. And so I said to him, could we please just make copies? I don't want to have, he goes, Gary, I trust you. You're a responsible young man. I was a bit of a younger person back then. He goes, I trust you. Just take the file. And again, I was terrified I would lose it. I could just imagine, what if he does become president and somebody's trying to write his biography and they say, well, what happened in this era of his life? And they say, well, we don't know. Some idiot writer lost the file. It's gone forever. I mean, these couldn't be replaced. So I'm just going to tell you, for the next week and a half until I saw him again, I knew where that file was 24 hours a day. I had to know where it was because it didn't belong to me. I've lost so many of my own files, but I can just replace them. It's not a big deal. But that file wasn't mine, and I took care of it, and I protected it, and I made sure I got it back in good condition. The same way, when I realized this body, it's not about I'm okay with how I am, or I don't mind if I don't live as long as God ordains me to live. I don't mind, how I look. It's not about what I think about my body. It's about what God thinks of how I'm treating the body that He gave me. I only get one body. You only get one body. And it's a radical thought when we realize God's claim is that body doesn't belong to us. It belongs to Him, and we need to treat it accordingly. Now, it's not only the case that my body doesn't just belong to God. As a Christian, I also believe my body belongs to my wife. I've been asked to also address how this relates to us in marriage. And Paul says something astonishing in 1 Corinthians 7:4 when he says this, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Now, I want to be careful here. I've worked with a lot of couples. I'm not talking about asking our spouse to maintain the same appearance they had when we got married. That's unfair. It's unrealistic. And the reality is, in marital sexuality, satisfaction doesn't really come from appearance. The way our brains work, the way the whole sexual relationship works, it's far more based on character and the nature of the relationship than some artificial physical attraction. But here's where it does matter. It's not about looking sexy. It's about the ability to perform sexually. The state of our health does impact that sexual relationship. I've just wrapped up a book with a co-author, Deborah Folletta. She's a licensed counselor. It's called Married Sex. In that, we go through a lot of things about the biblical view of sex and how couples can grow in this area. And one thing that we stress, and I think it needs to be stressed, is that porn, the way it rewires our brain, will literally kill our desire for our spouse. It's a mental assault on desiring our spouse. And there's a neurochemical reason why that happens, that eventually if somebody is heavily into porn, they're going to lose their ability to be excited by their spouse. But here's the thing. While I hear blogs talking about this and pastors preaching against it and teachers talking about it and podcasters going into that, and again, I think it's a true message, what we don't hear is that just as porn mentally makes it difficult for us to be sexually excited about our spouse, obesity can assault our ability to function sexually. And I think that can be just as serious because it still makes us unavailable to our spouse. For men, obesity impairs blood flow, often leading to erectile dysfunction. And for women, there's a similar effect. Dr. Susan Kellogg is director of sexual medicine at a graduate hospital in Philly. She said this is a quote, "We are beginning to see that the width of the blood vessels leading to the clitoris in women are affected by the same kind of blockages that impact blood flow to the penis. When this happens, a woman's body is far less responsive, and a drop in desire is not far behind." Now, here's the good news. Losing as little as 10 pounds can help jumpstart the sex drive. Now, as one who struggles to lose weight, I know to some of you saying, oh yeah, losing as little as 10 pounds can, might as well say, and all you have to do is run a 4-minute mile. I know it's not that easy, but here's the thing. Even when you don't lose weight, things like bringing down blood sugar levels and bringing down cholesterol, even without weight loss, those things can improve libido. Here's what Dr. Kellogg, here's how she explains it. Quote, "Any activity that increases blood flow to the large muscle groups in the thighs, buttocks, and pelvis, such as yoga, brisk walking, or cycling for 20 minutes 3 times a week, is also going to bathe the genitals with better circulation. The result is more lubrication, better arousal, and better orgasmic function, and ultimately a return of sexual desire." Now, I was told it was okay to get PG-13. It wanted me to address the marital relationship, and I realized by saying those words, I probably slipped over into R above PG-13. But we're adults, and let's just be honest, in marriage, this does impact our availability to our spouse. Because biblically, our spouses have no other options for sexual fulfillment. And so it's my responsibility, as much as it's within my power, to make myself available to my wife. If one day before the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes decided the morning of a Super Bowl to run a marathon, and he shows up to the Super Bowl tired and sore and barely able to stand, his coach would understandably be furious. This is the Super Bowl. We hired you to perform for us. Why are you running a marathon in the morning? Well, in one sense, letting our health go so that we're not available to be there for our spouse is an absolute denial to our spouse. It's something they can only get from us. It's not an act of kindness. So my body doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to God. And if I'm married, as I am, it also belongs to my spouse. What I want to do next is look at the spiritual challenge of taking care of our bodies. I'm not pretending that it's easy. Exercise has always come easy to me because I love to run. I've done 14 marathons. I've been running for, well, probably over 40 years. And for a good part of my life, in my 20s and 30s, and even a little bit into my 40s, my running was able to cover a lot of food errors. And then when I turned 50, I moved to Houston from Seattle, and 2 things were important there. One, different weather, and now I had a different metabolism. In Seattle, I could run in just about any kind of weather situation. I had 3 different coats for 3 different types of rain. And if you dress for the rain, you get used to it. Switch out shoes every other day. It's not that big a deal. But coming to Houston, you can't dress for heat and humidity. I mean, you can only take so many clothes off and you still have the heat and humidity. And my mileage was cut in half. And so I'm more sedentary. And then my office at the church is in the worship suite. And it's also where the choir people come through a lot. And apparently they just like to dump food in the worship suite. And often people will go on vacation, they go to Hawaii or something, they bring back, these are killer, these chocolate covered macadamia nuts. I mean, they're so good. If you have them, you know what I'm talking about. But here's the challenge. Macadamia nuts have more fat and calories in them than any other nut. Right? That's why we cover them in chocolate. It's sort of our American way, take something that's already iffy and make it even worse. And when I was running 2 marathons a year, I used to do that, run one in the spring, one in the fall. I could indulge and no one would know it, but I'm in a season now where that's not true. In fact, I'm in a season where it is more difficult than it has ever been for me trying to lose some weight. In fact, last weekend, because I've been very serious about this year, on a Saturday, I ran 11.5 miles in the morning and just ate 2 meals. And I was so excited the next morning, I thought, I want to see how much I lost. I got on the scale the next morning. I had gained 2 pounds. And these weren't crazy meals either by any means. I thought, this isn't fair. I mean, what? If I'd run 16 miles and only had 1 meal, would they then only have gained 1 pound? I mean, it could be so frustrating sometimes because it doesn't seem like it's fair. And sometimes it doesn't even feel like it makes sense. And I'll be honest, it can then be humiliating, particularly when you've written a book about it, when you were a skinnier person and a person in better shape. But here's the thing. Here's why just being engaged in this battle is a spiritually healthy thing to do. When I'm humiliated, according to the Bible and the Christian classics, humility is a good thing. 3 times the Bible says, once in the Old Testament, twice in the New, that God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. God opposes, but shows favor to the humble. I don't want God to oppose me. I want his favor, and humility leads to that. It's why the Christian classics called humility the queen of all the virtues. And so when I'm engaged in this, even when I feel like I'm failing and it's bigger than me and it beats me, it's a great spiritual exercise, not just a physical exercise. It's a great spiritual exercise. In fact, it doesn't just build humility, it also develops perseverance throughout Scripture. The Bible elevates the need for perseverance. We don't talk a lot about that today. But in the book of James, it says perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. The sense of urgency, perseverance must finish its work, James says, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking it. Without perseverance, we can't live the abundant life. We'll be ineffective. We'll be unproductive. We'll be immature. We'll be incomplete as people. So nothing calls me to perseverance at this stage in my life like trying to live in a healthy way. It's a great spiritual challenge of perseverance. Let me explain it this way. Let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to address this. I'm going to deal with this. So you exercise 4 or 5 times this week. You watch what you eat. Maybe you pass up the desserts. And then you get on the scale at the end of the week, and maybe you've lost half a pound, all right? Do you feel better because you've lost half? No, probably. You might even be discouraged at how difficult it was. Do your clothes fit any differently? No, they feel pretty much the same. And you're going to start to wonder, all of that effort, the positive, the negative, was it really worth it? And let's say you have a roommate who's laughing at you all week long. They're sitting on the couch when you go out for your runs or you get on your Peloton. They have your dessert. They have seconds. And at the end of the week, they've gained half a pound. Do they feel worse because they gained half a pound? No, they probably don't notice a difference. Do their clothes fit differently? No, a half a pound's not going to make their clothes feel any tighter. But if you take that trajectory out where you keep losing half a pound and he or she keeps gaining half a pound, there will be a difference to how your clothes fit, how your heart works, and how you feel in 6 months' time. There will be a difference for your roommate, how he or she feels and how their clothes fit and how their heart is reacting in 6 months' time. Body care, this is a key, body care requires immediate sacrifice for delayed rewards. Body care requires immediate sacrifice for delayed rewards. Indulgence has immediate benefits, but delayed consequences. The benefits are immediate. You taste it, you feel full, it's delicious, and the consequences, the negative consequences, are delayed. And that's why perseverance is so key. And you could readily see the application in all areas of our life, to our finances, to parenting, to evangelism, where we have to sacrifice now when we don't see the immediate benefits, but we do believe in the end it's the right thing to do. And to avoid those things that have the immediate payoff, but a cost down the road. That leads us to spiritual health. The pursuit for me of physical health leads to spiritual health because it leads me to humility. It helps me grow in perseverance. That's why I say it's all about pursuing the abundant life. Not about an artificial body shape, but the abundant life as God created me to live it. And what happens then if we don't take up this challenge? We're not willing to grow in humility. We're not willing to grow in perseverance. Instead of pursuing the abundant life, we settle for the just get through it life. And I see so many people do this. I believe it breaks God's heart. We don't pursue the abundant life. It feels too hard. We settle for the just get through it life. We let our health habits fall. Exercise goes, the eating goes, bad things for our health are brought in because we're just trying to get through a tough day that becomes a tough week, that becomes a tough month and a tough year, and then a tough decade. I had a doctor in Bellingham that I loved because so often when I go see doctors, the first thing they say is, you need to cut out some of this distance running. Marathons aren't really healthy for you. And so I would just find a new doctor. And I found one that ran marathons and I was able to work with him. And he told me about a patient he had that had all the symptoms that alarmed him that this man might die an early death. He was morbidly obese. He smoked cigarettes. There was no exercise. There's just a lot of things going wrong. And the doctor kept treating him and he wanted to go deeper. And he said to him, look, I need you to tell me that you're willing to give up those cigarettes. They're really going to cause you some issues. And the man said, doctor, they help me stay focused. I have a demanding job. I need that cigarette break. It just gets me back. I can't let go of the cigarettes. He says, all right, well, can you give up the ice cream at night? He had ice cream every night. You can eat that, but let's just start. Maybe let's just see what happens if you'll give up the ice cream. He goes, doctor, I work so hard. I need that reward at the end of the day. I'm not sure I could get through the day without having that ice cream. He goes, okay, fine. How about if you walk at lunchtime? We'll start getting a little bit of exercise. He goes, doctor, I have my associates work 12 hours a day. We work through our lunches. I can't set a bad example of going for a walk during the week, during the workday. And my doctor looked at him and said, then you need to prepare to die. He wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. He said this just getting through it life is going to cut short your life because this has become a pattern and it's impacted your body and you weren't made to live that way. See, the just get through it life, what we're trying to do is we're medicating the pain of our life instead of addressing the pain of our life. It's a short-term solution that leads to long-term problems. Doctors numb the pain to fix the problem, and that can be healthy. But when we numb ourselves to forget the problem, that's unhealthy. Whether we use sugar, whether we use alcohol, whether we use nicotine, whether, we just, whatever crutch it is, if it's to forget the stress, if it's to live an out of control life, that's not the way forward. The abundant life is found by addressing the cause with God, not running into spiritual narcotics. And it's so tempting to do this when life gets tough and tense. I heard a farmer tell me, when you are raising horses and the barn catches on fire, you have to hold the horse's reins really tightly. Because if you let go of the reins, the horses will often run into the barn and burn to death. And I thought, why would they do that? And they explained that the horses become so attached to their home. whenever they're nervous. That's why they run faster when they're going home. They just, for whatever reason, the way a horse's brain works, it wants to get back home. And so that barn is where it feels safe and secure. And in the fire, it's panicking. And the horse thinks, it's not logical in a human sense, but to the horse, I'm panicked. Where do I feel comfortable? I feel comfortable in the barn. Even if the barn is burning, and to find comfort, the horse runs into the barn and it's running into its death. And we do that as humans. We all have our own barns. My barn, quite frankly, it's sugar. When I deal with stress, when I deal with disappointment, sugar is my barn that is burning down that I want to run to. I remember when I was writing, I've written, I think, over 20 books at this point, but I remember when I published my first book and I was so eager and hopeful. And I went to speak at a banquet. It was a fundraiser for another ministry. And I now know, having done this for decades, that you're not usually going to sell very many books at a banquet because they're not there to hear you. They're there to support the ministry. But I had high hopes. And so I set up my book table with my one book and I gave a talk and it went well. People were laughing and they were crying and they were responding. But they weren't book buyers. Now, I kind of know a lot of it depends on the community. It was a small rural community in a state not known for its literacy. I don't want to be too specific. Let me just say it was west of Virginia. And so I put it up and I watched and I felt humiliated. I felt fearful. How am I going to make this career as a writer look if I'm not even selling one book after a talk that seemed to go so well? And I got done and I packed up those books. And I thought, I know what I'm going to feel better. I'm going to go to Dairy Queen. I'm going to get a Blizzard. I'm going to get some fries. You know, you get the fat, the salt, the sugar. And I did. I felt better. It was this rush. Now, here's the thing. It's not scandalous that I went to a Dairy Queen to deal with my shame, to deal with my fear about the future. But when I woke up the next morning, was meeting with the Lord, He convicted me. And I pushed back. Well, God, look at what guys can do on the road. I mean, at least I'm not looking at porn or something. And God doesn't have patience for that. He says, Gary, I want you to live the abundant life, not the just get through it life. And when you're using sugar that way, you can handle it now, but I wish I could have looked ahead because He's going to say the time's going to come when your body can't quite handle it. You felt embarrassment. You felt fear. You felt discomfort. That's not the way to treat it. Don't run to the spiritual narcotic. Talk with me about the deep needs of your soul. Pursue the abundant life. And so God was calling me to an entirely new orientation with food. I used to think, I grew up and it was just this way. I'll eat what tastes good to me. That's what I thought. Okay, I'm going to eat it because it tastes good to me. But the challenge is, food isn't just about that enjoyment. I'm not saying we shouldn't find some delicious food and spices and whatnot, but when you have the messed up taste buds that I do, it can really get you into trouble. Dr. Stephen Kopecky from the Mayo Clinic says this, and he puts it so clearly: every food a person might eat either fights or contributes to disease. Let me say that again. Every food a person might eat either fights or contributes to disease. So is this food helping me live the abundant life, or is it just getting me through and creating its own problems? We need help to make such a monumental change. We can't do this on our own, which again, it pushes me back to dependence on Jesus, which leads me to humility, which is a good thing. I have to accept the humility of how difficult this is, but doing it out of worship and discipleship to God. Look, I don't know what your barn is, whether it's looking at something you shouldn't look at, drinking something you shouldn't drink, smoking something you shouldn't smoke, spending what you shouldn't spend, eating something you shouldn't eat, or letting hurt isolate you from relationships. We all have our own barns. But when you know that barn is robbing you of joy and vitality and energy, don't run into that barn. Choose the abundant life. Now, even if we don't see the immediate success, like I said, the humility, the perseverance, and for me, the compassion is well worth the struggle. Because when I admit my struggle, there are certain sins that I feel like I have control over, that they're not even really temptations, and I can become so judgmental. But this, I feel so humiliated. I can't judge anybody for anything because daily I live with this frustration that it is so hard for me to say no to sugar and to live that life. And so I do speak as one who, rather than being judgmental toward others, I have great compassion for this culture, because I don't think that this battle has ever been more difficult to fight than it is today. Our society seems designed to create obesity. Think of it this way. The most common daily lunch in North America, the most common daily lunch would be some kind of meat and vegetables and drink and maybe even a dessert. That was a feast in Old Testament times. And for us, it's the second meal of the day. There's a fascinating study. They wanted to look at how eating habits have changed through the centuries. And one of the ways to do that is to look at paintings of the Last Supper. Why? Well, it's a scene that has been painted throughout history. It was such a climactic point of history that you have painters that painted the Last Supper through all ages. And so what these people did is they compared the size of the disciples' heads, and they compared it to the body, to the food on the table. You could look at the dimension of the heads and the bodies and compare it to what the servings would be in relation to those bodies. And this was fascinating to me. Between the years 1000 and 2000, the main course size pictured on the table in front of Jesus and his disciples increased by 69%. The plate size increased by 66%. And the loaves of bread, just even the loaves of bread, increased by 23%. The greatest increase in size occurred after 1500. The biblical account, think about this, the biblical account of the Last Supper mentions two things, bread and wine. But throughout the centuries, other things were added. There were meats, there was fish, there was lamb, there was pork, there was other delicacies. Why? The painters were working off their own cultural assumptions. Last Supper, they think about Last Supper, there wasn't a photograph. So they just put in all these other food options as if there were mini meats and mini side dishes and even delicacies to choose from that just wouldn't have been there in the first century. The meal kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. My daughter we had her over for dinner, her friend from the Netherlands. She was an exchange student in high school. And I asked this young woman from the Netherlands, what's your biggest surprise coming to the United States? You know what she told me her biggest surprise was? She says it was the size of our plates and the size of our portions at every meal. She said, I've never seen people eat so much food. And that isn't entirely by accident. It's because we live in a capitalist society. I am not anti-capitalist. I'm not knocking capitalism here, but I just want you to think about this. Capitalism is based on us buying more product. That's how people make money. So food companies hire food engineers, and their job is to create more demand for the product. And so they have literally scientifically engineered food so that we keep wanting more. They know the right mixture of fat, sugar, and salt that all but addicts us to certain kind of foods. There are 4 things that a good food engineer is looking to do. The taste of the food matters. The ease of eating. Apparently we're lazy, and the easier it is to eat, the more we eat. The meltdown of the food, the way it just breaks down in our mouth without us having to chew it. And the early hit. Literally a neurochemical sensation when we first put that in our mouth and our brain fires up and they know, okay, they're going to keep eating that. One engineer boasted this: refined food simply melts in the mouth. Refined food simply melts in the mouth. The consequence is you can drop 500 to 900 calories in 5 minutes and still feel hungry. Because they're not selling you food to make you feel better healthy-wise. They're designing food to make you feel better emotionally so that you want more, and you'll feel even better so that you consume more, so that you buy more. So if some of you feel like you're being targeted, you are. One venture capitalist bluntly confessed, the goal is to get you hooked. We're selling a product. We want you to buy more product. And I mentioned earlier about my book on married sex, that the church often warns people about porn. Seems to me, if we want to address this area, the church might also want to warn people about food engineers. I'm not attacking you if you're a food engineer. You're doing what you're hired to do. But we have to understand their motivation, their agenda, and our motivation and our agenda. Their motivation is to sell more food. Our motivation is, I want to offer my body as a living instrument to God. So good health will require us to confront and resist our culture, the spiritual challenge of the difficulty of perseverance. It will require us to deal with our emotional issues of running to that barn that comforts us. It will require us to resist so many areas of life, but in doing that, we become mature and complete people. I want to reread 1 Corinthians 9 in the Message. I'm running hard. This is 1 Corinthians 9, 26 through 27. I'm running hard for the finish line. I'm giving it everything I've got. No sloppy living for me. I'm staying alert and in top condition. I'm not going to get caught napping, Paul says. Listen, let me close with this. What our body is today speaks primarily of our past. We've made not just hundreds of decisions, literally millions of decisions. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to drink that. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to exercise. I'm not going to exercise. I'm going to take the stairs. I'm going to take the... All of those decisions have led us to where we are now. I don't judge you because I don't know your battles. I've heard the stories. One woman, a beautiful young woman, raped in her 20s. She was dating famous people. She was raped twice. And she said to herself, this is not going to happen again. And she purposely gained over 100 pounds, saying, I don't want anybody to look at my body as something they would want. Now, I'm not saying nobody would want a body that has gained weight. That this was her talking, not me. But it was her act of defense. I've been violated, and so I'm going to try to create a body that won't be violated. Look, I don't know your struggle. I don't know your genes. I don't know what you've had to face. I am not here to judge anyone because I judge myself more than I would judge anyone else. It's to say there's an abundant life that God calls us to, an act of discipleship and worship that takes this whole struggle and brings it to an entirely different dimension. We can't control what we did in the past. That's the past. These are the bodies we have. But here's what we can control, where we're going. We can apply wisdom. We can pray for spiritual strength. Instead of seeing God condemning us, saying, Jesus, help me, please. I want to do this. It's so difficult to me. And here's the thing. It's not like we have to get somewhere to be acceptable. Paul says, if you offer your bodies to God today, they become acceptable and pleasing to God. You can be acceptable and pleasing right now. And with that acceptance and affirmation, then you address the issues that attack you. I'll end with this analogy. William Gurnall wrote a Puritan classic on Ephesians chapter 5. And he talked about what's the difference between Christians sinning and unbelievers sinning. I mean, we all sin, right? Christians still sin even after we know the Lord. Unbelievers sin. Some people say, well, what's the difference? He had a great analogy. He says, it's like we're all on this horse. Here's the difference. Christians are riding out of the rain. Unbelievers are riding deeper into it. We're all in the rain of sin. It's raining all around us. We're not making the best choices. The key for this battle, I believe, are we riding out of the rain? Are we slowly, step by step, going toward the abundant life, the green pastures that God has for us, based on worship and spiritual growth that impacts how we treat ourselves physically? And here's the thing. If we do this right, we'll need a lot less toilet paper, recycled or not. I'm sorry to end with that earthy note, but let me pray for you as we close. Father, I thank you for those that want to engage in this struggle. It's not easy for a lot. Lord, for some I know it feels so easy, but there may be a time in their life when it's not. Lord, I thank you for your affirmation. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for your promise to give us the strength we need. We look to you, we love you, and as people who are loved, we want to offer our bodies back to you. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to thank you again for joining me. If you'd like to know more, a lot of what I said comes out of this book, Everybody Matters, Strengthening Your Body to Strengthen Your Soul. Thank you.